c'est qui? Secrétaire général de l'OCDE.
Secretary General of the OECD, Executive Secretary of UNICA, Mr. Lopez, President of the African Development Bank, Mr. Kabaruki, but above all, Prime Minister Duncan Kablan of Côte d'Ivoire. It's a real pleasure for me to be with you today, this 13th International Economic Forum on Africa. We're all here together to continue a discussion which began a long time ago and which has been following a very logical thread. But before we begin, perhaps I may first of all thank some of our partners who have been supporting us in this discussion and this policy dialogue. The Financial Times, This is Africa, Washington, Huffington Post, Jeune Afrique, France 24, Radio France International, Radio Monte Carlo, LIA, the Chinese press agency Xinhua, the Pana Press Agency, and the New African Magazine. And allow me also to thank the sponsors for this initiative. The New York Institute, Richard Atias, is with us, of course, today, one of the panelists. Just a couple of words before we begin our meeting and our discussions. Last year, we met here to talk about the importance of youth employment in Africa, a continent where you have the largest number of people in the world who are looking for work. That represents a huge pool of resources, but can also be a problem if these young people cannot find a job, a quality job, as they're looking for, and for which they have carried out their studies. So we need to find resources and comparative advantages to which allows the countries to create stable jobs for them. And those resources are, to a great extent, natural resources when it comes to Africa. There is some good news. Natural resources have made it possible to achieve 5% economic growth in Africa. And productivity has gone up 3%, whereas in Latin America, just to compare, it's only 1%. But there's also less good news, namely that Africa has reduced the percentage of production of natural resources when you look the entire world. And that is because investments in exploration are lower, $5 per square kilometer, whereas in Australia and Canada, it's $505 of investments per 55, says the speaker. So, lot to be done. Is it reasonable given the fact that we could see the Dutch disease creeping up?
CDs have developed by using natural resources. The point is not to be dependent only on natural resources. And how to deal with a better use of natural resources that help diversification of the economy, that's the matter of our discussion, where we will discuss about how to get resources and mobilize internal resources for development, for government that have very weak fiscal revenue sometimes, how to manage the resources with sovereign funds, and how to spend the resources for the best of the economic development of this region. But to discuss about all these things, let me invite first the Secretary General of the OECD, Angel Gurria, that will introduce our debate. Ladies and gentlemen, accompany me with a warm applause.
Thank you, Mario. Monsieur le Premier Ministre, soyez le bienvenu.
Prime Minister, welcome. Carlos Lopez.
Secretary of everybody speaks Spanish today. Don, how is your Spanish? Is it getting better? Huh? Yeah? The Prime Minister speaks excellent Spanish, and of course, Carlos Lopez sounds like a local. I don't know local what, but it's a Mexican or Spanish or something, or maybe Portuñol or something like that. I'd like to extend you all a very great welcome to this 13th International Economic Forum on Africa. Welcome to all the ambassadors of the OECD who are with us today. Welcome to all the ministers who have joined us from many countries, and all the officials, experts, international organizations, and a special word of thanks to Don Kaberuka, the president of the African Development Bank, who is leading the charge here, leading us all in this effort. Carlos Lopez, as I mentioned, who is with UNECA, and also Monsieur Atias. I would like to thank you all and welcome you to the effort, to this exercise today. Now, we're focusing on how to harness natural resource wealth for economic transformation. And we're not saying that we're trying to avoid the Dutch disease, but of course it's a little bit like that. And coming from Mexico in particular, I'm very, very aware of these dangers. The impressive turnout of the event underscores the importance of the issue on the agenda and highlights the African continent's energy and commitment to support its strong growth trajectory. We call this forum Africa 2.0. We wanted it to sound digital because in many ways Africa has experienced a rapid, profound transformation, sometimes too fast to grasp, like that of the internet. Africa is indeed a continent on the rise. Since 2000, Africa has grown by 5.1% per year on average. That's twice the growth rate observed over the 90s, and nearly 3 times the average growth of the OECD economies during the same period. I have to say with a little bit of shame that the OECD growth in the same period was 1.8%, and Africa was 5.1%. Even if all economies are not expanding at the same pace, in fact, 6 African countries experienced negative growth in 2012. The regional average projects a remarkable dynamism. And this dynamism is very much related to increasing trade and investment flows. This is the old-fashioned way, Mr. Prime Minister. Africa's exports quadrupled from 2000 to 2007. These positive achievements are also due to fundamental improvements in macroeconomic policy. So you had a good performance on the export side, but also in terms of the economic governance side. And these good macroeconomic policies have allowed the continent's average fiscal deficit to fall steadily from 7% in the 1980s to close to 0 at the end of this, at the end of the 20th century, and at the beginning of the 21st century, and then as we move into the first years of the new century. Now, what about inflation? Another typical curse of many developing countries. Well, inflation dropped from about 10% on average during the 1990s to maybe around 6%. Again, progress there. Today, the region's economic outlook is rather promising. Regional GDP is expected to grow by almost 5%, 4.8% in 2013, and by 5.3% in 2014. There are also signs of improvement in the quality of growth. This is very critical. Africa's labor productivity increased by close to 3%, almost half of which, please mind this, half of which was attributed to workers moving to new activities with higher productivity. That means there is this natural migration of low productivity to higher productivity by the workforce, which is extremely desirable and which is very natural if you think about it, and which is happening in the region. Productivity enhancement is what sustains economic growth in the long term. These are all impressive achievements, but of course they should not be cause for complacency. African countries are still facing multiple economic and social challenges And having given all of us a pat on the back, Monsieur le Premier Ministre, Don, Mr. Lopez, let's now go into say, okay, a few seconds of satisfaction and then move on. What are the challenges? What is the homework? Africa's remarkable GDP